Hello, welcome. My
Hi.
name is Deepa. I'm also currently a Master's of Public Policy student and GSR for the School of Public Policy. And we really appreciate you joining us today. Through our interview series, we will be hosting guided discussions with agencies, regulators, and academics on the topic of climate change and how California's water is currently being affected. Today, we have joining with us Dr. Dinar and Dr. Namadi for our discussion. I would also like to extend a warm welcome to our second guest, Greg Woodside, who is the Executive Director of Planning and Natural Resources at the Orange County Water District. Greg, could you please introduce yourself and tell us about your agency?
My name is Greg Woodside. I'm the Executive Director of Planning and Natural Resources at the Orange County Water District. The Orange County Water District was set up by the state of California in 1933 to manage the groundwater basin in central and northern Orange County. The groundwater basin provides about 3/4 of the water supply for the 2.5 million people within our water district. And we do a number of groundwater management and water recycling activities to provide water through the groundwater basin in a sustainable manner.
Thank you. So let's go ahead and get into our questions. So our first question is, what does the future of California's water or Orange County's water look like with climate change progressing year by year with no preventative measures or regulations?
Yeah, so a little more background to provide some context. So
Yes.
in our case, we manage the groundwater basin in Orange County. In our overall supplies for water in our area, some of our water supplies come from Northern California, from the State Water Project, and also from the Colorado River. So we have most of our supplies of water from our local groundwater supplies, but we, in aggregate for our area, also use water supplies that are imported from Northern California and from the Colorado River. So in terms of ways that climate change is affecting California water, the primary things we've been seeing in terms of climate change have been that the falls appear to be becoming drier. Scientific papers have been publishing on studies that indicate that the fall periods of the year are getting drier, less precipitation during the fall, and also less precipitation during the springtime. So the data we have our own precipitation data, and we haven't analyzed it as rigorously as a scientist who's a professional meteorologist would do it. You know, certainly there's scientific papers that have been published indicating a trend towards drier falls in springtime, a more compressed rainy season. And just looking at our data, not quantitatively, but just qualitatively looking at our data, we certainly, I think from a individual analysis of it, seem to see that we are having drier falls recently. So what that means for us is that the rainfall comes in a tighter window, and that makes it more difficult for us to capture Santa Ana River storm flows. So of the supplies we recharge into our groundwater basin, we recharge water from the Santa Ana River and also from recycled water and from imported water we purchase from the State Water Project or from the Colorado River. So of those supplies from the Santa Ana River supplies include storm flow. So that's flow in the river that occurs directly in relation to precipitation events. And we have a very effective stormwater capture program. We capture about 50,000 acre feet per year of stormwater on average. So in a dry year, it'll be much less than that. In a wet year, it'll be more than that. But on average, we capture about 50,000 acre feet per year of stormwater from the Santa Ana River. Mm-hmm. And if the trend continues of a more compressed rainy period, drier fall, drier spring, even if we get the same amount of precipitation, it becomes more challenging to capture the stormwater if it comes in a shorter period of time. We haven't been able to quantify any impact on our stormwater capture because of changes in the climate, but if the projections going forward bear out, we would anticipate we'd likely have more challenges in capturing stormwater with that compressed rainy season.
Mm-hmm.
So that's primarily an effect that we would observe in our area. To the extent that we also rely on water from the State Water Project and water from the Colorado River, there's published reports that indicate as the climate continues to change that the snowpack will be affected. There would be a higher snow level, a higher elevation at which snow occurs, and a smaller snowpack. So that would make it harder to store water in reservoirs in the Western Sierras that provide water to the State Water Project. So that there'd be less snow, it would melt sooner, and that would translate to less supplies being available to import from the State Water Project. There's also published reports that the Colorado River supplies are being affected by climate change, warmer temperatures causing more evapotranspiration and less snowpack, and that would translate to less supplies from the Colorado River. So if those trends continue, that would be an effect on our supplies into Orange County for imported water also.
Thank you.
Yeah, just clarification question. When you say capture, how can you just talk about what does it mean technically?
Yes. So with the Santa Ana River, we are downstream of Prado Dam. So we work with the Army Corps of Engineers who own and operate Prado Dam near Corona to temporarily hold water for us behind the dam. And then downstream of the dam in Anaheim and Orange, we divert water off of the Santa Ana River. So in the city of Anaheim, near Imperial Highway, in the area of the Santa Ana River, it's about 10 miles downstream of Prado Dam. We divert water off of the Santa Ana River, and then we infiltrate it into the aquifer with what we call recharge basins. They look like a lake or a pond. In some cases, they're real shallow. So these are areas where the geology is good, the sediment at the ground surface is sand, and we can infiltrate high amounts of water diverted from the river into the aquifer. So when we talk about capturing stormwater, we mean diverting it off of the Santa Ana River and then infiltrating it or percolating it into the aquifer through our surface recharge facilities.
So you mean that you are limited by your capture capacity is the Prado Dam, the size of the dam and the reservoir behind the dam. This is what makes it difficult if the flow of Santa Ana water concentrates in shorter periods of time.
So if we have a more compressed rainfall period, even if the total annual precip doesn't change much, then the stormwater comes in faster compared to the past. So the two main limitations are our ability to infiltrate the water. We have a very extensive system. We have about 25 different recharge basins. We have about 25,000 acre feet of storage capacity in Orange County with our recharge basins. But there is a finite amount of capacity to recharge the water in our facilities in Anaheim and Orange. And then there's also a finite amount that the Army Corps will capture for us at Prado Dam. But we've been working with the Army Corps cooperatively for over 30 years to expand the amount of water captured at Prado Dam. We continue to work with them going forward. We have very active collaboration with them that we're continuing, and we're working to capture stormwater temporarily at Prado at a higher elevation. The Prado Dam is operated based on water surface elevation, so the Corps will currently capture up to a certain elevation, and we're working to raise that elevation as we work with the Corps to make sure that that can be done and it doesn't affect their flood risk management purpose of Prado Dam. So any water they hold for us can't impact the flood risk management purpose of the dam, which is primary. And then we also need to make sure we're not having any negative impacts on the environment. So we continue to work on those issues so that going forward, we can capture an additional increment of water at Prado Dam.
And how are water agencies across California expected to respond to climate change?
Yeah, there's a lot of different aspects to this. The first thing I would mention is that we as agencies, local agencies and regional agencies, we receive essentially, I'm going to use the word loosely, policy direction from the state through requirements on state grant funding and also the requirements that are placed upon integrated regional water management. So for state grant funding, so if we're going to apply for a grant from the state of California, this is usually for bond funding. So funding such as through Proposition 1 that was passed a few years ago, or Proposition 84, which was a little prior, before Prop 1. These state grant funds have water project funding. And if we're going to apply for that funding, there's requirements that we have an integrated regional water management plan. And that integrated regional water management plan has to include certain features such as adapting to climate change. So that's typically what we see from the state in terms of what the state is looking for water agencies to do. And it's quite a bit. So that guides projects that we seek grant funding for to be projects that help the state address climate change. So for example, we have a very large water recycling program. We recycle currently into our groundwater basin about 100,000 acre feet per year of recycled water. So in rough terms, a third of the water that we infiltrate into the aquifer is from recycled water. So if you look at our total water budget for our groundwater basin, a third of the water comes from recycled water. And recycled water is very consistent with the state's goals of addressing climate change because recycled water uses about 1/2 or 50% of the energy that we would be using if we use the alternative being imported water. So imported water from Sierras, from the State Water Project, and imported water from Colorado River has a higher energy requirement, a higher greenhouse gas footprint, if you will, compared to our recycled water. And then also our stormwater, when we capture stormwater at Prado Dam, that has an even lower energy footprint or greenhouse gas footprint. The water we capture at Prado Dam doesn't require any additional construction. So if we can capture more water at Prado Dam, there's no new facilities needed, and it flows to us by gravity. Our infiltration system primarily is gravity driven. We have some pumping, but it's relatively minor. So the greenhouse gas benefit of doing more stormwater capture is very significant. So grant funding requirements the state sets up incentivizes those types of projects.
Thank
So
you.
that's primarily what we see and a lot of water agencies see as how we're expected to respond to climate change. Now, looking forward, we expect that to continue to change. Certainly the state has prioritized climate change issues and adapting to climate change. So we expect going forward what the state's going to expect us to do to change. That's what we've been seeing so far. And fortunately for us, it's very consistent with the goals we have already, our goals being to increase our local water supplies. So we have a long-term goal to decrease the amount of water we import. And so that leads us over the last 20 plus years to have more water recycling and more stormwater capture. And those goals are very consistent with the climate change adaptation strategies that the state wants water agencies to implement.
What would you say are some water management changes that could help conserve water?
So in addition to more stormwater capture and more water recycling, which we're doing and other agencies are doing, certainly another big factor is using less water and using water more efficiently. So in our area in north central Orange County, a large amount of water usage is outdoor water usage, landscape irrigation. So programs and efforts to use less water outdoors and be more efficient in terms of using water outdoors is certainly something that is an important consideration, both for agencies and also for individuals.
Thank you. What are some regulations Orange County Water District has put into place, and what regulations will be put into place in the future?
We don't have authority to do regulations regarding activities that would directly relate to climate change. Our authorities provided by the state are how we manage groundwater pumping in the basin. So we can, through pricing mechanisms, control pumping in the basin. We don't actually have the ability to reduce someone's pumping. So we can't put a cap on someone's pumping rate. But what we do is we manage overall pumping from the basin using our pricing structure. So how we have the authority from the state to assess a fee on pumping, and we have the ability to have essentially, in simple terms, like a base fee and then an additional fee if they pump over a certain percentage. Our authority does not extend to, strictly speaking, be able to limit someone's pumping or tell someone they can only pump so much. But we use a pricing structure to manage overall pumping so that the pumping is sustainable and we don't overpump the basin. But we don't have any separate regulatory authority for things that would directly relate to climate change.
So were damages from sea level intrusion estimated? And if so, what are the ranges of these damage estimates?
So we have a current seawater intrusion control program in two different areas. So we have a very well-developed seawater intrusion control program in the area in Fountain Valley and Huntington Beach. So we call that our Talbert Gap Seawater Intrusion Program. So we've been injecting water to control seawater intrusion since the 1970s, and we continue that. We haven't quantified, economic damages from that because we have been able to control seawater intrusion there. And then we also have a cooperative program with Los Angeles County Department of Public Works for an area right on the OC-LA County line. That's called the Alamitos Barrier, or Alamitos Seawater Intrusion Barrier. And we jointly work with LA County and agencies in LA, Long Beach, and another agency called the Water Replenishment District of Southern California to control seawater intrusion on the OC-LA county line, because the area where seawater intrusion occurs, it's right on the county line. Part of it's in OC, part of it's in LA County. So again, in that area, I haven't seen a quantification of damages because we are controlling seawater intrusion in those areas. So the issue we see there is that as seawater elevation rises, as the mean sea level rises, it will be more difficult to control seawater intrusion in those areas. So as sea level rise occurs, that will make it more challenging to control the seawater intrusion into the aquifers with our current systems. And so if the projections of sea level rise occur, we'll need to do a lot of study and a lot of analysis to look at how we can control seawater intrusion going forward. And we don't have a estimate of that yet. It's something we've identified. We've done some preliminary modeling with higher sea level rise, higher sea levels, what it could look like just in terms of how that could affect the aquifer, but we haven't done the work yet to look at what additional facilities we might need to build. I think that'll be something going forward we'll need to look at. Right. So it is something we've identified as a potential impact from climate change to the extent that the sea level does continue to rise. Historically, we've used a combination of injection wells and extraction wells to control seawater intrusion. Currently, it's been injection wells. In the past, we did have some extraction wells also, but the mix of tools we use, whether it's injection wells or extraction wells or other types of barriers, that's all potentially going to have to be looked at in much greater detail in the future.
So you mentioned, what I wanted to ask is about climate change and about capture and storage. So any other examples or possibilities for collaboration between Orange County Water District and the upstream water agencies, for example, to store water, because you mentioned that narrower window of water flow.
Right.
And is there anything that can be done to increase level of cooperation between the Orange County and upstream agencies? So this is one question, because this could be a very, let's call it win-win situation. You you will find arrangement, but it can release the pressure on the Prado Dam and on your recharge basins. Second question is, you mentioned that you have a very extensive program of recharge of the groundwater basin. Again, I don't know if you have numbers on the cost per unit of water, but from what I know, from reading and from what you just described, this is a very extensive, it could be a very expensive also. So my question is, given your location and vicinity next to the ocean, did you consider, and also given the fact that some of the technologies, the water desalination technologies, have been improved over time, have you considered using or building or using the existing desalination plant to replace water that then can be used for replenishment of the aquifer?
So in terms of collaboration with the upstream agencies, we're part of what's called the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority, which is us and the 4 similar regional agencies upstream of Prado Dam. And we work together on a lot of different collaborative studies. We haven't yet had a major focus on collaborating for stormwater capture, but I could see that potentially happening going forward. We're currently very active with a study to store more water at Prado Dam using what's called forecast-informed reservoir operations. We're working on that with the Scripps Institution of Oceanography and San Bernardino Valley Municipal Water District, which is the other member agency of SAPA in the San Bernardino Valley area. They're indicating their growing interest in forecast-informed reservoir operations, or FIRO. So I could see our district and Valley District collaborating on forecast-informed reservoir operations, potentially at Seven Oaks Dam. We have to be very careful with the water rights issues, because the water rights issues need to be carefully addressed for water rights in the Santa Ana River. So Seven Oaks Dam is one potential location for collaboration. The other potential for collaboration would be the San Antonio Dam, which would be the 3rd dam in the watershed of some size. Prado is much bigger than San Antonio, but San Antonio Dam, which is on Chino Creek near Mount Baldy, could be a potential location for collaboration on stormwater capture also. So there are, besides Prado, these other 2 dams, Seven Oaks Dam and San Antonio Dam, which going forward could be a location for collaboration on stormwater capture. And as with FIRO, we're looking to improve the weather forecasting and the runoff forecasting. And that's something that the entire watershed would benefit from. The entire Santa Ana watershed would benefit from that. So something that we're very excited about. In terms of the ocean water desalination, the Water District has been looking at that in collaboration with the Huntington Beach proposed desalination project. That's going through the permitting process currently with the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And then they also need to get a permit from the California Coastal Commission. So if those permits are received, there'd be additional discussion between the Water District and the Poseidon Project is the general term that project's referred to as the Huntington Beach Poseidon Project. There'd be additional discussions between Poseidon and the Water District about potential OCWD participation in that. But the current phase of that is it's still going through the permitting process with the regional board, and then after the regional board with the state coastal commission. And then if those permits are received, it would come back, I think, to additional discussion between the Water District and the Poseidon Project is the general term that project's referred to as the Huntington Beach Poseidon Project. There'd be additional discussions between Poseidon and the Water District about potential OCWD participation in that. But the current phase of that is it's still going through the permitting process with the regional board, and then after the regional board with the state coastal commission. And then if those permits are received, it would come back, I think, to additional discussions between the Orange County Water District and Poseidon about the Water District potentially purchasing some of that water or all of that water.
You know that in this kind of facilities, there is a big economies of scale effect. So the more participating agencies, the lower is the average price.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So our Santa Ana River recharge is actually very cost effective. If you're interested, we just recently worked on a paper that's going to be part of a UNESCO publication with several different chapters or sections on different projects around the world, and it seeks to compare the cost of each of these on a similar basis. Obviously, if we're going to estimate the cost in like $1 per acre foot, you have to make a lot of assumptions because we've invested in land for our facilities over 70 plus years. So how do you value the land, et cetera? So making a bunch of different assumptions, we came up with a cost per unit of water. If you're interested, that publication is supposed to be out from UNESCO within the next month or so.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, thank you very much.
So going back to the sea level intrusion question, I have a follow-up question where I wanted to ask, aside from physical infrastructure, can you please describe other measures that were implemented and or considered for implementation and their relative effectiveness?
So for the seawater intrusion program, we have a very extensive monitoring program that uses a series of monitoring wells. So we're able to monitor both the groundwater elevations and also the salinity in the groundwater. So we can monitor the effectiveness of our seawater intrusion control program using these groundwater monitoring wells. So we have a very well-developed monitoring program, and what that shows us is that we can control the seawater intrusion with our current monitoring, with our current injection programs at the Talbert Gap and at the Alamitos Gap. And it also provides the information that we can model with a computer model how injection of the water to control seawater intrusion, how that actually works. So we have a computer model that simulates the groundwater elevations, and that's the model we can use to estimate if the sea level is higher, how does that affect the operation of the barrier. So that's the way we started to get a handle on if sea level rise does continue, which is certainly what the projections are, then how that would affect our barrier. I did want to mention one other thing. It's a little different aspect of the overall impact of climate change is that the Santa Ana Watershed Project Authority and the Bureau of Reclamation have done some studies on the effect of a warmer climate on evapotranspiration from the watershed. So two other impacts that we haven't mentioned yet would be that there are increased rates of evapotranspiration in the watershed. So that would translate to some decrease in river flow because the warmer temperature causes more evaporation from surface water bodies in the river, but also the plants transpire more water with a warmer temperature. And so there's reports that SAPA and the Bureau of Rec have published that estimate those increased losses with a warmer climate in the future. And then with a warmer climate, there's also more demands for irrigation. So if people have the same amount of grass to irrigate, with the warmer temperature, it takes more water to irrigate that same area of grass, as one example.
Given your experience dealing with climate change and all these projects going on, what would you say to some other agencies, or what would be the takeaways for some of the other agencies that they're facing similar challenges, but they're just starting to build infrastructure, invest to deal with the issues that are coming up with climate change?
I would say in our case, one of the primary observations we've made and something that has really resonated with us is that because we've had a long-term goal to reduce our usage of imported water and have more local water supplies, that's something that we had started as one of our goals. And there's a whole set of reasons we wanted to do that years ago, to have less reliance on imported water, is that those projects we do to achieve that goal have really been very much consistent with and aligned with the things we need to do to address climate change. So as we look at the investments we've made to have more local water supplies and less imported water, those investments have also made us more able to adapt to climate change.
Right.
So we've reached the same goals in many cases because of the investments we've made to have more local water supplies. I would say that just one other point there is that I think we've all seen the extent to which we need to learn from each other.
Right.
Different water agencies and different groups have different skill sets and different experiences and different knowledge, and the information exchange and sharing lessons learned is really something that we need to continue and make a big focus of.
But I really wanted to thank you for joining us today.